We are the paradoxical ape. Bipedal, naked, large-brained, long the master of fire, tools, and language, but still trying to understand ourselves. Aware that death is inevitable, yet filled with optimism. We grow up slowly. We hand down knowledge. We empathize and deceive. We shape the future from our shared understanding of the past. CARTA brings together experts from diverse disciplines to exchange insights on who we are and how we got here. An exploration made possible by the generosity of humans like you.
Good afternoon. Very nice to be once again in California, in San Diego, at a CARTA meeting. In the course of the last 8 million years, the hominins, the tribe of primates to which we belong, displayed a remarkable diversity. And what you see on this chart is that for almost any period of the past, there was always several species of hominins existing on Earth, sometimes in the same regions, which is kind of puzzling for us, because today there is only one species of hominins, I would say fortunately, and this species, Homo sapiens, displayed a remarkable evolutionary success and an adaptive and reproductive success. It's present everywhere. It expanded, replacing, displacing, or partially absorbing all other forms of hominins. And this situation, having a single species of hominin on Earth, it's in fact exceptional in many respects and prevail only for the last, say, 40,000 years, which is nothing at the scale of geological times. And it's probably one of the most challenging of the main challenges that paleanthropology meets, is to explain why and how this happened. Of course, we tend to think that technological progress, innovation played a major role, but it's likely that also social complexity and the ability that we have to create extended networks of individuals beyond local groups is essential also in this process. We have many reasons to support the notion that our species originated in Africa. What genetics says is that the genetic diversity in Africa is much larger than elsewhere on Earth. And the humans that we find outside of Africa seems to be a sort of subsample of this African diversity. And of course, this matches this notion of an out of Africa expansion of our species. We also have fossils. And we have a group of fossils, mostly just after 200,000 years, that has been found in sub-Saharan Africa and more precisely in East Africa, that are rather close to us anatomically. They are rather close, but they are not really exactly like us, and we used to call them early Homo sapiens or early modern humans. I found this term modern humans a bit problematic, because when we say modern humans for these hominins, we mean cladistically modern. It means they belong to our lineage, because they were not really anatomically modern, nor behaviorally modern. And that's a bit confusing, I think, for the future. And so with these discoveries emerged the notion that There was in the past, somewhere, maybe in East Africa, a sort of restricted Garden of Eden, where in a sort of biblical way, suddenly, around 200,000 years ago, a fully human creature, like us, emerged and then later expanded. And this view that prevailed for a long time has been challenged by many discoveries these past few years. And I want to take you very far from East Africa, in this landscape where you see in the back the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. It's a place called Jebel Irhoud. I think it's difficult to be further away from East Africa when you're still in Africa. It's very far from Kenya. And we are somewhere between the town of Marrakesh and the Atlantic coast. And this place of Jebel Irhoud is known by paleoanthropologists and has been known for a long time because in the early 60s, the exploitation of a barite mine revealed an archaeological site, many bones, many lithics, and the workers of the mine found this skull and brought it to the medical doctor of the mine. This medical doctor sent me a letter in the 90s explaining the discovery. The site was passed on to a professor of paleontology at the University of Rabat. And this fossil, I would say, did not really match the picture we had of evolution of hominins in Africa. And it was long considered a sort of African Neanderthal. And it was seen this way because in the 60s, well, everything with a big brain and a big brow ridge was a Neanderthal, and so people would find Neanderthal anywhere. It's only later that Neanderthal were identified as a Western Eurasian clade. I've been always interested in the Jebel Irhoud site, and when I moved to the Max Planck Society in 2004, immediately I contacted my colleagues in Morocco to resume works in the site. And initially, our intention was mostly to date the site because the exact age of this hominin has been a mystery for many years, and there were several attempts, but rather unsuccessful, to have an exact date. So we spent, I would say, years cleaning the site and exploring it, and we were lucky to find in a corner of this sort of quarry, because the site has been mostly destroyed by the mine and some other excavations, we found an in situ sequence of about 3 meters of archaeological deposits. And in this sequence, the bottom of the sequence is very rich. There is a lot of artifacts, a lot of remains of fauna, and also a lot of traces of fire activity. And this was a great luck because this fire burned flints, and so we could collect a lot of these burned flints, and burned flints are essential to implement a method that we call thermoluminescence to date sites. And so with these burned flints, we were able to provide a much more accurate dating of the site than ever before. Well, of course, when a paleoanthropologist starts digging somewhere, he hopes not to find only burned flints. So we're very lucky to find also new hominins in the site. In fact, in a couple of years, we tripled the number of fossils coming from Jebel Irhoud. We found many postcranial remains, but also we found a partial skull, a fragmentary face, but rather complete. Also an adult mandible that's fairly well preserved. I must say it's for this part of the late Middle Pleistocene is probably the best preserved adult mandible that we have in Africa. This mandible is not like my mandible, it's not like your mandible. It does not have a very prominent chin, for example, but it has many features in its proportion and also in the dental features, which are shared evolved conditions with us. And this is one of the arguments that led us to assign these fossils from Jebel Irhoud, not to the Neanderthals, as it was believed for a long time, but to an early form of Homo sapiens. Regarding the age of the site, with this method of thermoluminescence and using another method called ESR, we're able to provide a series of dates very consistent, assigning these deposits where we have hominins to a period of time around 300,000 years ago, which made these fossils from Jebel Irhoud the oldest Homo sapiens that we know today in Africa. They are much older than these East African forms that I showed you. And they are not in the Garden of Eden. They are very far from the Garden of Eden, unless you consider all Africa is the Garden of Eden. From a morphological point of view, one of the most striking aspects of the fossils of Jebel Irhoud is the face. And this face is very similar to our face. What you have here on the left is a chart showing you points which are located on this two-dimensional space in relation to their morphological proximity. It's something we call geometric morphometrics. So the distance between points express the difference in shape. And what you see here is a big blue polygon representing the variation of present-day humans. The pink stars that you see are either fossils from Jebel Irhoud or different possibilities of reconstructions of this fragmentary phase that I showed you, Irhoud 10. And you see that they all fit into this polygon. So it means you could meet in the street the face of Jebel Irhoud today. Okay? In the meantime, you see also that what you have here, Neanderthals and also Middle Pleistocene hominins that were long considered to be ancestral to Homo sapiens are very different. So about face, what's interesting is that Homo sapiens retain a number of primitive features that we have in erectus, and these forms, they are very derived compared to this primitive form. This being said, Irhoud and us do not have just an erectus face. There are also some slight difference. We'll discuss that maybe tomorrow in our workshop. Regarding the brain and the brain case, it's a completely different story, because the brain case of the Jebel Irhoud hominins is a rather long and broad brain case. And so these individuals did not have the sort of rounded globular brain that you find in extant humans. Again, on a geometric morphometrics analysis, you have extant humans in blue, very different from Neanderthals in red. Erectus are at the bottom in green. They show the primitive condition. And again, you see that Neanderthals evolve in a very different direction than Homo sapiens. And our fossil hominins from Africa, those from Irhoud and the other ones from East Africa that I mentioned, are here along an arrow that's evolving gradually toward the modern condition. Again, Middle Pleistocene forms that were considered to be ancestral to sapiens possible, they group with Neanderthals in very different, very, I would say, derived situation. So we can zoom in a little bit into this evolution of the brain in the last 300,000-400,000 years. And what you have here is a more detailed analysis of different groups of Homo sapiens of different ages. They are represented by blue polygons with numbers in relation to their age. Along the horizontal axis, what is represented is mostly size. And so what you see is the brain size increase between Erectus, Neanderthals, and Sapiens. But also what this chart shows is that when Homo sapiens reach a brain size, which is about the brain size of our present-day humans, 1400 cc, something like that, morphologically, it started diverging in a completely different direction, almost perpendicular to this trend. And along this axis, what you have is this increase of globularity of the brain. So you have the parietal area becoming more salient. And importantly, the cerebellum, this part of the endocranium that is at the bottom of the brain in the back, that becomes bigger and bigger. This is one of the main features evolving in our species. Cerebellum has been long considered to be mostly involved in motor coordination, but we know now that cerebellum is involved in much more complex tasks. It's connected to many parts of the neocortex. It's involved in the reward circuits of the brain. It's involved in language. It's involved in social interaction. And this is one of the features that we see developing in our species. So all these discoveries raise a number of questions. And the main one is the origin of our species, because what paleogenetics tells us is that the split point between the lineage leading to Neanderthals and leading to Homo sapiens is somewhere around 650,000 years ago. So there is quite a stretch of time between 300,000 and 650,000. And we don't have, I would say, much evidence for this time period. For a long time, this middle Pleistocene hominins that we call Homo heidelbergensis was considered to be a possible common ancestor of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. And today, and because what I just showed you, the fact that it's derived already on the side of Neanderthals, we see it more like a common ancestor of the Denisovans and the Neanderthals. So it might be, I would say, essentially an Eurasian group. But the problem is that we also have it in Africa, and this is kind of puzzling. We have at least 2 fossils that we can assign to this group in Africa, and we have indication that it could have survived much later than we used to think. So that's, again, it's something we have to consider. An African continent with different groups, the ancestors of Homo sapiens that we still have to identify, these sort of Neanderthal-like creatures that may have survived for a while, Homo naledi. So in other words, a much more diverse situation that we imagine in a continent with some kind of mechanism of isolation for all these groups. The Jebel Irhoud specimen, they are associated to what we call a Middle Stone Age assemblage. A lot of flakes and points, not any more end axes. And it's one of the earliest forms of this Middle Stone Age. We actually find soon after 300,000 in South Africa and in East Africa, we find early forms of Middle Stone Age. And it's very tempting to relate the expansion of our species at the scale of the continent with the development of these new kind of technologies. Of course, we would like to have more fossils, but we don't have that many. If we look at the fossil record in Africa after 300, we have mostly 2 fossils that could be something like the Irhoud specimens, but they are very poorly dated. And what's really interesting with the Middle Stone Age is that is among these Middle Stone Age assemblages that we see gradually emerging more and more complexity, cultural complexity with the development of bone industries, a lot of points. Also the development of non-utilitarian objects like these beads that has been found in different parts of Africa, and also a lot of diversification on the continent. This development did not occur just in sub-Saharan Africa. Just in one site in Morocco, we have more than 300 of these beads, which are around 100,000 years old. So the new picture emerging about the origin of our species in Africa is, first of all, a much older coalescence point for all the lineages belong to our species, probably beyond 300,000, possibly a structured of this population in Africa for a long time. This is something difficult to test based on the fossil evidence because we don't have much fossils. And it's quite possible also that these different branches that would have existed in different parts of Africa could have been reshuffled by environmental changes. As a matter of fact, Africa witnessed a lot of climatic changes during this time period. And in particular, we had occasionally the monsoon coming from the Gulf of Guinea going much further north than today. And so we have a series of what we call Green Sahara episodes, by the way, one of them occurring just before the time of Jebel Irhoud, and a large region today covered by desert, and it's very large, was peopled by hunter-gatherers living in a savanna with rivers, with lakes, some of them as big as Germany. And so we have to keep this in mind when we speak about the evolution of our species in Africa. In other words, looking at the location of present-day populations, for example, to reconstruct the past might be very misleading because it's likely that the descendants of all these people who left all these points all over the Sahara maybe today in West Africa or in East Africa. So we think that these episodes might be episodes during which advantageous mutations or innovation would have passed from one group to another. And this may explain why at the end of the Middle Stone Age we have these kind of beads that I showed you, which are made from a very special type of shells, can be found from South Africa to Morocco and from Morocco to the Levant. I thank you very much, and I want to express my acknowledgements to all my colleagues who participated in the project, and to the Max Planck Society for its very generous funding, and the INSAP in Morocco for letting us work in Jebel Irhoud and supporting us. Thank you.